I was just waiting for you. So we have the session on the session 2, trade investment and regional value chains, deepening regional integration amidst global uncertainties. The session is chaired by Dr. Rajan Shudesh Ratna, Deputy Head and Senior Economic Officer, UNESCAP South and Southwest Asia Office. Special remarks will be given by Dr. Rupa Chanda, Director, Trade and Investment and Innovation Division. So may I request Dr. Chanda to come on the dais. 4 eminent speakers, Dr. Salim Raihan, Executive Director, South Asia Network of Economic Modeling and the Professor, Dhaka University. He will be joining online. And then we have Dr. Paras Kharel. Paras, please come. Professor Amita Batra, Professor Batra. Paras is the Executive Director at Swati, Professor Batra with Professor Jawaharlal Nehru University in Delhi, and Professor Saeed Ahmed, Professor Ahmed, the Professor of the Jamia Millia Islamia. So we are running the session 15 minutes late, but I hope that we'll be able to manage the time. 3:30 is the closing time, and the session, the housekeeping announcement on the session I've already shared with the chair. There will be presentation PPT. There will be some presentations online, and we go for a Q&A at the end. So with that introduction, I hand over to the chair for the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Prabir. Good afternoon, everybody. I know it's a post lunch, so some of you would be struggling to concentrate on the deliberation and discussion. But I'm sure the topic is such that the panel and speakers will not let you rest. It will be, I indeed look for a very thought-provoking discussion with the panel. The topic is about trade, investment, and regional value chains, deepening regional integration amidst the global uncertainties. In the first session also there was some talk which happened, but here we would like to focus as per the agenda on what kind of actionable policy recommendations are there to promote by the BIMSTEC members to deepen the regional cooperation and integration for strengthening resilient supply chains and attract investment and reducing the tariff and non-tariff barriers. What actions need to be taken to enhance the trade facilitation and its measure what needs to be harmonized, and again linking to the first question as to how the FTA deepen the regional value chain. Many of you who have been following the BIMSTEC know at one point of time this was one of the fastest growing regional trading group, and the negotiation for the FTA started way back in 2004. But it's still 22 years and the FTA is still a dream. So when we talk about a free trade agreement, when we talk about deepening regional integration, one need to really see where we are. Long ago, when I was associated with this, we did some analysis on the initial exchange of offer among the BIMSTEC member countries, and we found that around 70% of the trade which was happening at that time was in the sensitive or a negative list of BIMSTEC FTA, which means you are liberalizing only 20 to 30% of your trade. So with that kind of mentality, definitely the regional integration can never be the true one. The second also, though the talk and the framework agreement talked about services and investment, the talks on services and investment have not really have happened. Most of the BIMSTEC member countries, you will find their economy, more than 50% contribution of services is there to their economy. Still, the whole focus goes on the goods, and the services and investment, etc., have not been given their due. The other not so surprising aspect is, though many of the countries, even if they have a common border, the cost of trade between the countries within the BIMSTEC region is much higher than the cost of trade with US or EU or any other country. So that also speaks about some challenges, some problems which are inherent in the region which need to be addressed, because many other countries with their autonomous liberalization, the duty on the goods are not that high, but there are other non-tariff costs, there are other infrastructural costs, there are other procedural costs that need to be reduced in order to benefit. Is it possible that while waiting for an FTA, the growing non-tariff barriers among the countries, effort should be made to address them? There are many issues which could be solved, which could be addressed without even having a free trade agreement. As SCAP, we have been working on these issues, not focusing on all the BIMSTEC countries, but with India, focusing on Northeast, with Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan. And we found that there are small irritants, which if they can be handled not at a policy level, but at a ground level and a procedural level, it can really make trade happen. Having said that, given that the time constraint is there for the speakers, I think there should also be a time constraint for the chair or the moderator. So without much ado, let me invite Dr. Rupa Chanda, my senior colleague from SCAP, Trade and Investment and Innovation Division. She has a presentation as a special remarks. Thank you, Rupa, for joining despite your bad health condition. She will make a presentation, but she has medical conditions, so she will not be sitting here. Maybe she need to do, so she will go back after her presentation. Rupa, you have the floor. And you have, as you said, special and differential, 15 minutes time.
Yoga. Okay. Sorry, I've already taken up 1 minute. My time. Okay. Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. Really happy to be here and seeing a lot of my peers, colleagues after a long time. I've been asked to make special remarks in a session where I think there are more experts on the other side, at least compared to me, on this issue. But I thought let me provide more of a perspective in terms of certain aspects of trade, connectivity, trade facilitation, some of the issues that Rajan has mentioned just now, give what really is the context, make some suggestions regarding what could be a way forward. I think we all know what the gaps are, what the major challenges and risks are in this region, but still I think it's important to provide that overview, high-level overview before going to the panelists. So what I'll talk about is why there is a compelling case for integration, what really are the challenges and gaps, and what could be some ways forward. So I think I don't have to really convince the convinced here in this room regarding the unexploited potential, but we have a large market, we have large population base, we have many common aspirations, objectives. I mean, if you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, the importance of industrialization, creating employment, getting into global value chains, many of these are common aspirations for this region. So that should actually help in terms of alignment of interests. There's a lot of complementarity. I mean, Rajan mentioned about overlap. Yes, there's overlap, but if you look at the asymmetries in terms of the size, in terms of resource endowments, in terms of individual strengths of member countries, there is potential here for complementarity and within value chains also to have differentiation. How we leverage that, that's really the issue. There's, of course, the geographic advantage here. We talk about this being the bridge between South and Southeast Asia. A very important aspect is the growing external linkages. Of course, Thailand in particular because of ASEAN and its connection through RCEP, but also many of the individual countries, not many, but definitely for India, some of the others as well, increasing interest in engaging with other external partners and to what extent that can actually be leveraged as a source of investment and creation of networks within the region. And most importantly, as the session title also says, the growing sort of geopolitical challenges, the fragmentation that we are seeing, the importance of regional resilience, regional security, market diversification. We have LDCs graduating in the region. So a lot of this would resonate with the importance of intra-regional integration. Very quickly, I mean, this is just to make the point again very starkly, yes, we have tremendous asymmetry in this region. Of course, India and then Thailand are really the major players. If you look at participation in world exports, of course, not extremely high even in the case of merchandise for the larger market, India. But the point I'm trying to make here is that the existence of large markets and the existence of potential sources of investment from within the region itself could make a case for integration. Again, if we look at country-wise total trade, if you look at the relations, it's really largely driven by India's bilateral relations with countries, to some extent Thailand. So obviously the unexploited potential is very clear amongst the majority of the countries within BIMSTEC. It is primarily bilateral corridors that are driving this. Again, a very quick comparative perspective. We all know about the great golden benchmark of ASEAN 22-25%. One is not talking about aspiring to that level. We are sitting at somewhere around 6-7% in BIMSTEC. But the point here that I'd like to highlight is that it's important to have some sort of common defining frameworks and vision. So in the case of ASEAN, for instance, the digital and green transition, the digital economy framework, DIFA, there are common goals and frameworks and strategic action plans that are driving the members together. In the case of BIMSTEC, yes, there are some. In the context of connectivity in particular, there are some initiatives, but apart from that, there isn't really an overarching vision or strategic framework or direction that is there, and that is important. So that's the main point that I wanted to highlight, and yet you do have, for instance, geopolitical and other considerations there which do make the region attractive. If you're looking at de-risking, looking at growing resilience, China +1 strategy, and things like that, these are opportunities that could be leveraged. So internally, there is a need to come together with a common vision and objective. In terms of GVC and RVC participation of BIMSTEC countries, again, as the very first graph highlighted, it's really India and Thailand that are driving this participation, that too in particular segments, but the backward linkages are quite weak. The forward linkages are also not as strong compared to, say, ASEAN, but they are there in certain sectors. Within BIMSTEC, it's again primarily the bilateral sort of relations between India and certain countries, or Thailand and another country, which is driving some of the production chains, but multi-country production chains are largely non-existent. And of course, as Rajan already mentioned, that famous FTA has still not seen the light of day. Now, a point to consider is that the way that you want to go? If that's not happening, could you consider something else, like an early harvest scheme? Could you think of a partial approach? Could you look at low-hanging fruit sectors where there are commonality of interest? How do you bring in other players, like the private sector potentially, also which could give some of the fillip that is needed, because there would be some interest driving then this whole process. Very quickly again on GVCs, RVCs, and a comparative perspective. As I said, I want to give this comparative context, it's important. On GVC maturity, clearly it's again just driven primarily by India or Thailand. We do not have complex production networks here. As I said, there is no key guiding instrument that would be driving this intra-regional coordination. And the integration focus has largely been on connectivity, but there are opportunity factors there. This is really to give you a sense of what are, across various sectors, what is really hampering. I'm just giving an illustrative sort of list here. If you look at textiles and clothing, one aspect which is clear is there is competitive sort of existence of the countries in the value chain here. There are some complementarities, but these are not very strong. So clearly, again, your competitors in these products, so how do you develop RVCs? But if you look in contrast, in the case of ASEAN, you do have countries at different parts of the value chain, and therefore the scope for complementarity is there. If you look at food and agriculture, one of the striking things here is on standards and on tariff and non-tariff barriers, again, which is holding back the value chain linkages. I'm just very quickly giving a flavor of the elements that would need to be addressed if you really want to accelerate integration. Another important aspect in the case of food and agriculture would be the trade facilitation. Okay, so what the ASEAN has done compared to what has not happened in BIMSTEC. So if you really want to push agricultural trade within the region, then you also have to have faster clearances and so on. Transport equipment is one area, again, where there are some backward linkages, but again, not as sophisticated as in the case of ASEAN. ASEAN has gone further in terms of EVs, for instance, batteries and so on, and they're even talking about an integrated investment plan now within the ASEAN region. But in the case of BIMSTEC, this is dominated mainly by India and Thailand. Again, intra-BIMSTEC value addition is not happening. You don't have the complex networks. And finally, in pharmaceutical, this is one area which actually sees more backward linkages. That's mainly because of the dominance of India as a provider of generics and some of the sourcing of APIs. But again, what holds back? Lack of regulatory harmonization, clinical trials, registration. So again, there is the whole regulatory aspect that gets highlighted that you need to address if you want to deepen integration. So just to summarize based on these 4 quick snapshots, is protection levels remain high, complementarity may not exist in many of the value chains, the extent of diversification within the sector may not be there, lack of harmonization of standards. Also, something that's not highlighted in those 4 sectors, but intra-regional investment flows, we don't really have data on that, but extremely low levels and largely driven by one player, India. Investment and business climate in the countries themselves are lacking, and regulatory issues, complexity, and trade facilitation. So a lot of the things that need to go hand in hand if you really want to have value chain linkages, RVCs developed, these are not existing. So why is intra-regional trade and investment low? If you look at the challenges and gaps, it's exactly a replica of what I just highlighted, need to be the drivers of integration. You have high tariff and non-tariff barriers, you have poor infrastructure and connectivity, weak regional coordination, lack of harmonization of standards, difficult business climate. And a very important point I would like to highlight is that bilateral relations outside the bloc have played a more important role compared to within the bloc. So there is a weak political commitment and coordination as a result. The focus is much more outside. And this actually could also be turned into an opportunity to some extent where you have common partners who could be potential investors. Can you leverage that investment and think of creating production networks? This is just a thought I would like to leave. Now, the points that I just made, again, a quick snapshot of these same points. Look at the tariff measures. I don't have non-tariff measures here. But again, as Rajan again highlighted, phytosanitary measures, for instance. This is a very common NTM in BIMSTEC, and there is no harmonization here. There is no unified rules of origin, let alone the FTA. The levels of applied tariffs remain higher, even though they've been declining due to unilateral liberalization in the countries. But this is not a process driven by intra-regional negotiations. Investment restrictions, extremely important because investment is key to developing value chain linkages. You have to tie up the investment part with the trade if you want to develop the production networks. And here you have a whole range of restrictions, foreign equity ceilings, licensing requirements, land ownership, etc. And then you have also business model related regulations. There's a lot of divergence and regulatory complexity when it comes to investment. So this is another hampering area. Trade facilitation was also mentioned, higher trade costs. Again, using ASEAN as a benchmark, we see that you're much lower in terms of your trade facilitation implementation rates compared to ASEAN, and in particular cross-border paperless trade. Nationally, of course, many countries are pursuing trade facilitation and digitalization, but cross-border-wise, this remains low globally, this remains low in Asia-Pacific as well, but within BIMSTEC, it's much lower than the Asia-Pacific average. And specifically, if you look at areas, e-signatures, e-certificates, and so on, these are some of the areas that need to move forward. Now, I also want to highlight on digital. Why? Because, if you want to also look at emerging opportunities, you want to overcome physical sort of transactions costs and so on associated with trade, does digital provide an opportunity here? Especially given that you have countries like India, you have also Thailand. There's been a lot of digital transformation in some of these member countries. You have countries which have adopted digital transformation strategies. So can you really leverage this? But again, you see here the digital regulations are quite complex, quite heterogeneous, and they are more restrictive compared to that in other parts of Asia Pacific. So this is again something to think about. You want to leverage opportunities in digital trade or use digitalization as a means to advance integration. That too will require coordination and much more regulatory cooperation. So what is the way forward? Basically, the strategy and approach requires some concrete deliverables and outcomes. We cannot just be talking and negotiating for eons on something. What should be the guiding principles? You need to have alignment of interests and objectives. So choose some areas where you have national interests and objectives aligning and which you can build on. You look at some of the individual strengths and strategic interests of members. So digital is one of the areas that I mentioned. Look at the complementarities, and here I mean the investment-related possible complementarity with trade, and availability of financing, and how can you tap the private sector. I think we haven't talked enough about the role of the private sector and how we can increase engagement, because if you want to bring in investments, you have to engage the industry chambers and the businesses. So in terms of focus areas, very quickly, trade barriers, of course. So as I said, we have to expedite the realization of the FTA, but can you do something else? If you can't go that far, and in 20 years you've not been able to, can you negotiate an early harvest or a PTA instead of a full-phased, full-fledged FTA? Connectivity, extremely important. Here I would say that look also, given that you're a bridge to ASEAN, can you consider looking at connectivity with ASEAN as one of the ways which might help in terms of attracting investments and fostering more trade. Trade facilitation, here there is a lot of capacity difference within the bloc. So you do need a long-term strategic framework for trade facilitation, but alongside what is needed is capacity building, a lot more cooperation, information and best practice sharing, and maybe pilot projects in some of the border areas to show concrete outcomes and deliverables. Investment, as I said, is key to a lot of this. So here there are some ideas which have been floating around. These are not new ideas by me. Strategic investment zones, maybe looking at, as I said, the investment relations you have with third parties outside with whom you have comprehensive economic cooperation agreements and so on. Can you look at the investment interests of some of the larger players, India, Thailand, for instance, within this region? Can you look at investment hubs across key transport corridors? Look at structured platforms for business engagement. And of course, this has to be complemented by national efforts. These are just some of the areas that come up when you look at RVC potential across the different countries. What I'd like to highlight here, the smaller countries can actually look at niche green and tourism value chains. This is one area that could be of importance, and there is investment interest in this area. In services, there are several areas that would be relevant. Telehealth, for instance, medical tourism, ICT, energy, transport, again, has to be backed by investment by the players within the bloc, and there is investment, for instance, by India in the area of infrastructure in healthcare, in medical tourism, etc. Obviously, along with this have to be initiatives for skill development, mutual recognition, extremely difficult, so I'm not very hopeful on that front. But I think some sort of temporary mobility related things for business visitors could be considered in selected sectors for selected segments of industries and so on. On standard, digital economy, I think, is something we should really consider strongly, because this will open up huge opportunities in digital services trade, so regulatory convergence, looking at expertise that countries have within this bloc, and maybe cooperation at a broader level. Doesn't have to be trade and investment per se, but fintech, edtech, agri-tech, some of these things can actually lay the foundations for future integration. And my final thoughts on this, well, there is a very strong imperative, as I said right at the beginning. The current efforts are largely bilateral, that duplicates, that's inefficient. You have a global imperative, and you can also, by coming together as a bloc, have more bargaining power. What is really needed is to look at your shared needs and where you can give quick outcomes. There are some areas, as I said, health tourism, for instance, digital is one area, pharma has potential. Look at some of these and try to build trust through demonstrated outcomes. Finally, what we can do at ESCAP, I think we can address many of these in terms of building trust, helping align the blocks, standards, and providing the sort of regional benchmarks and frameworks. In terms of specifics, we do the work on trade facilitation through our survey, so information and best practice sharing that I mentioned could very well be done. On digital trade regulations, we have indicators which could help in terms of mapping where countries are. We have regional value chain analysis tools, the ones that I showed you earlier for the 4 sectors, so that could be used also to understand the possibility of creating linkages, negotiations related capacity building work, and of course increasingly work on foreign direct investment and how to direct it towards areas of sustainable development. So how do you attract and facilitate investments? This is work we are doing with IPAs and could very well be done here. And finally, of course, the larger sort of multimodal transport and connectivity support that we've been providing. So with that, thank you very much, and I hope, I'm sure my panelists will provide much more food for thought. Thanks.
Thank you, Rupa. Thank you. I won't summarize, but some of the very important highlights which you have done, and looking into the challenges and the solutions as to how and what needs to be done. Without much ado, I will now go to Dr. Salim Rehan, who is online. He's an Executive Director of SANEM. Dr. Salim, you have the floor.
Thank you, Dr. Rajan Ratna. Am I audible?
Yes, much more loud and clear.
Thank you. Okay, let me begin with a simple observation. The global trading system that supported export-led growth for decades is no longer operating under the same assumptions. Trade is still expanding, but it is becoming more fragmented, more regulated, and more political. Tariffs are only part of the story. So we know that carbon measures, labor standards, security-driven industrial policies, and strategic subsidies now shape market access just as much as price competitiveness. So I'll be talking more from the Bangladesh perspective. For Bangladesh, this shift matters profoundly. Our development model has relied on openness, preferential market access, and deep integration with global value chains, particularly in ready-made garments. That model delivered remarkable gains in growth, employment, and poverty reduction. Yet it also left us exposed. Exports are concentrated, markets are narrow, domestic value addition remains limited in many sectors. As global uncertainties intensify and Bangladesh moves toward LDC graduation towards the end of this year, these vulnerabilities become harder to ignore. So against all these kind of backdrops, so regional integration, especially the deepening of regional value chains, is no longer a peripheral agenda. It is becoming a central strategy for resilience, diversification, and structural transformation. It's very important for Bangladesh. And within that regional story, the Bay of Bengal occupies a uniquely strategic place. So if we look at Bangladesh's trade and investment structure, so the Bangladesh trade performance tells a mixed story. On the one hand, the country has built a globally competitive export sector, as I mentioned earlier, the anchored in garments, supported by scale, relatively low labor cost, and strong buyer relationships. On the other hand, this success masks underlying fragilities. And I have talked about this export concentration, and then it's also tells us that there has been limited structural transformation within the economy. And when it comes to foreign direct investment, it has grown, but very slowly. And still, Bangladesh attracts a very low level of FDI compared to its comparable competitor countries in this region and in Southeast Asia. So there are a lot of structure and policy level barriers to this foreign direct investment. So these structural features shape how Bangladesh experience global shocks. And we have seen that various global shocks, one by one, actually, it has kind of affected the resilience of the economy. And here comes the very importance of the regional integration. I'm glad that Dr. Upachanda, she made quite a lot of important points, and some of the points which I'll also be probably repeating. So why regional value chains matter more than ever? So I see there are three interrelated regions. First, risk diversification, and countries like Bangladesh, it needs to diversify its risk. And I have talked about the various risks. It comes from originates from very concentrated export basket, and also the kind of lack of resilience within the economy because of the kind of limited structural transformation. Second, I see the capacity building, and it's important that when you participate in the value chains, it builds up the capacity and also it builds up the resilience of the economy. That's the kind of very important aspect for the economy of Bangladesh. And third, I think, which probably not been discussed much, is the inclusive growth. What is the purpose of integration of the regional value chain if it doesn't really deliver inclusive growth? So that's why we need to look at the kind of broader pattern of structural transformation, how regional value chain and especially integration with regional value chain and global value chain helping this inclusive growth process. So when we see the South Asian integration gap and Bangladesh's dilemma, and I think we have already talked about these high tariff rates, para tariffs, non-tariff barriers are widespread. And this fragmentation imposes real cost on Bangladesh. Input sourced from neighboring countries often face higher barriers than those imported from faraway markets. I think Dr. Rajan Ratnam already mentioned about that. The kind of, even the distance is low, but the trade cost is very high when it comes to trading with the neighboring countries. So these geography and economic logic continue to pull in opposite directions. So, and the proximity to countries like India, Nepal, Bhutan, and Sri Lanka, Myanmar, and Southeast Asia creates natural complementarities. Energy trade, agro-processing, textile, pharmaceuticals, light ranging and service all have strong regional dimensions. The challenge is to align policy with the potential. So I see that the Bay of Bengal, I think already Dr. Chanda and Dr. Ratna, they have mentioned about the importance of the Bay of Bengal as a strategic regional platform. This is actually, it connects South Asia with the Southeast Asia, links landlocked regions to global markets, and hosts some of the world's most dynamic economies. So for Bangladesh, I see that the Bay of Bengal is not a distant concept. It is central to our geography and trade. And I was listening to the past earlier session where Dr. Mustafizur Rahman, he talked about the importance of the ports like Matarbari. It's coming up, but even the existing ports like Chattogram and Mongla, they already handle the bulk of the merchandise trade. It has the potential of connecting with some of the countries like in northeastern India, Nepal, and Bhutan. And the major challenge is how do you really realize the import of the potentials. So I can see there are three dimensions when it comes to the importance of the Bay of Bengal for regional value chain. First, the maritime connectivity, efficient ports, shipping services, the coastal logistics. We know that all these reduce transport cost and time, and that these costs, the transport costs and trade costs, are extremely high for countries like Bangladesh. So, and the second, the production networks. So, this Bay of Bengal region encompasses diverse economies at different stages of development. I'm not really limiting my deliberation on the BIMSTEC region. I want to go beyond, I'm taking into account the countries in the Bay of Bengal region. So, and actually, that really gives us these kind of diverse economies at different stages of development. And this diversity creates scope for vertical specialization, where countries focus on tasks rather than entire products. And the third is the strategic diversification. As farms look beyond traditional hubs, the Bay of Bengal offers an alternative corridor for manufacturing, assembly, and services linked to both Asian and global markets. I think Dr. Rupa Chanda, she talked quite a lot about these issues. So Bangladesh has the competitive advantage within the Bay of Bengal region. And its competitive advantage, of course, the traditional competitive advantage is the labor-intensive manufacturing. It remains a strength. But also geography is another advantage, as Bangladesh sits at the crossroad of South and Southeast Asia. When he talk about the demographics, Bangladesh has also a very large young workforce, which has the potential for skill upgrading and sectoral diversification. And we also know that the domestic market size of Bangladesh has a scope for demand-driven integration. So the growing middle class can support regional production in consumer goods, pharmaceuticals, food processing, and services. So when it comes to this trade policy reform to enable regional value chains, I don't really want to repeat what has already been said, but there are a lot of challenges with respect to the very slow progress in reform in tariffs, and the emergence of or the growing importance of the non-tariff barriers, various forms of non-tariff barriers. Dr. Rajan Ratna, he mentioned I think, very nicely about that probably at the policy level or the documentation level, you don't really see much barrier. But when it comes to procedural level, there are a lot of barriers which actually inhibit trade and that reduces the potential of trade. So even when it comes to investment policy and the central role of FDI, we see that this region actually doesn't really attract a lot of foreign direct investment, and also this region doesn't really allow interregional investment to happen much. Bangladesh, for example, has been trying to develop a lot of economic zones, special economic zones, and giving even scopes to neighboring countries, in particular India. But when you see the progress of these economic zones or special economic zones, it has not really been that much encouraging. So there is a lot of things need to be done. Reform in the policy level, reform at the procedural level, reform to eliminate various forms of structural barriers in order to attract foreign direct investment and to kind of get the full potential of the trade and FDI linkages. I think that is something very much missing here in this region, and this is extremely important to promote the regional value chain. So I think I don't really want to repeat what Dr. Rupa Chanda said. She showed a very nice table where the countries in this Bay of Bengal region, especially in Binnestreet region, they have the potentials in several sectors for deeper regional integration. But there are some commonalities of these sectors, and we see that it's not only in the manufacturing, but even in the areas of services sectors, there are huge potentials for integration. But when it comes to realizing these potentials, connectivity, both the hard and soft infrastructure are extremely, I would say, in a very difficult situation. And then several things are happening at the country level. But when it comes to connecting the countries, keeping in mind a very broader regional framework, and I think that is something very much missing. So that needs to be looked at very strongly. Uh, I think I just want to. I'm looking at my time. I think it's not much time I have, but there are global uncertainties, and we know that these global uncertainties are not temporary disruptions. They reflect deeper shifts in the global economy, and we need to really think collectively how to address these global uncertainties and how to build not only the national resilience but also the regional resilience. And so I think the regional value chains offer this form of insurance to counter this kind of global uncertainties. We know a lot of political economy challenges are there, bilateral relations, political relations between countries. I heard one question in the earlier session where the bilateral relation between Bangladesh and India was raised that particular issues. This is not a very static picture we are seeing. It's very evolving and dynamic, and the countries, the policymakers, and important stakeholders, especially the private sector, they need to take into account this political economy dynamics and this evolving dynamic landscape, and how and come up with a strategy how to address and how to integrate by addressing some of these political economy challenges. I agree with Dr. Chanda that you don't really need to probably talk about very deeper integration, which is may not be feasible at this moment, but to take approach which is more pragmatic and practical. I think my concluding reflections would be: first, regional value chains are no longer a theoretical concept for Bangladesh, and I think it's also applicable for other countries in Bay of Bengal. They're a practical necessity in an uncertain global economy. The second, the Bay of Bengal provides a strategic platform to deepen these value chains, linking South Asia, Southeast Asia, and beyond. Third, success will depend on coherence. Trade, investment, infrastructure, skills, policies must move together. We have seen that there are probably some areas of reforms, but then it is not being complemented by reforms in other areas. So that needs to be coordinated, and partial reforms will not deliver transformation. Finally, regional integration is as much a political project as an economic one. It requires vision, patience, and sustained commitment. From Bangladesh's perspective, I see that if Bangladesh can rise to this challenge, regional value chains anchored in the Bay of Bengal can support a more diversified, resilient, and inclusive growth path. not as a substitute for global integration, but as a stronger foundation for it. Thank you very much. I hope I tried to stick to the time limit which I was given. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rehan. Thank you very much for covering many, many issues, including the challenges and what kind of policy impediments are there and what are there which have been done in terms of policy, but rightly pointing out that the ground level or the procedures have the problems. Anyhow, I will now go to the next three of my panelists. Before I go, having heard Rupa and Salim, maybe I will just put some additional questions or thought for any of you to answer. Salim has talked about the special economic zones, and there should be a focus on all. So many years, more than 7 decades. At one point of time, Pakistan, India, Bangladesh were one country, then different countries. Nepal, India and Nepal have very historical linkages. Bhutan, again, same. But there is no special economic zone or industrial cluster which has come at the borders where 2 countries or 3 countries could participate. And why? Why has it not happened? There is one very successful case even in North Korea, South Korea. At their border there is a Kaesong SEZ which is closed now, but at one point of time it started. And that really brought some changes in the relationship. So even when we had seen these countries politically very warm, why has it not happened? Secondly, we talk about these regional value chain, global value chain, the present global uncertainty, whether it's a conflict or war or the tariff, we have failed to reap the benefit of regional cooperation and regional integration. To be very honest, if you look at few years ago when COVID happened, despite all the differences, political differences in SARC, a SARC COVID fund was established. That was the political will which was shown. In BIMSTEC also, countries stocked and the trade of essential items was unhindered, unstopped. So if we want to really come out with these, we could do. But is it that we are not having a very strong regional value chain among countries because we are competing with each other, or we complement with each other? That is a question. And NTB, I have been hearing for the last 3 decades or 4 decades in this region about NTB, harmonization, MRA, but nothing has happened. What need to be transformed? I mean, at the ground level, what can make things happen? So I'll just throw it if you can, but let me first go to Dr. Paras Kharel, Executive Director, Southi from Kathmandu. Paras, you have the floor. You have a presentation? No. Okay. So you have 12 minutes. The budget will be after 10 minutes.
Sorry. So I won't be using any slides in the interest of time. Thank you. Let me again thank RIS for this invitation and the partners for making this important conference possible. Now, the international trade landscape at the global level has reached a so-called new normal, yes, regardless of what the Supreme Court in the US does with regard to the reciprocal tariffs. Tariffs are going to stay at a relatively high level for sure. Right? And even after the Trump administration were to be replaced by a new administration, say after this term, US trade policy is not going to be the same. And there is emerging evidence from studies that have been published in top journals that fragmentation along geopolitical lines is already taking place, right? and trade between so-called geopolitical blocs has been growing at a slower rate or has been falling relative to trade within so-called the same geopolitical bloc. And in this process, an interesting development has arisen whereby a set of connector countries has risen: Vietnam, Mexico, and so on. And if you look at the data, we'll also see that India has also emerged as a country whose exports to the US has increased dramatically, right, prior to the Trump 2.0 tariffs. Okay. Side by side, it's not just a US specific phenomenon, but environment, governance, social compliance, and standards related measures, the so-called sustainability based trade measures, are also on the increase, and they are also here to stay. Think of the deforestation regulations at the European Union, or the CBAM, the carbon border adjustment mechanism there. And immigration, a relatively hard line on immigration, is also likely to remain in place even after changes in administration. So in this context, we should be looking within, right? But the irony is that, and that partly perhaps answers a point raised by Dr. Ratna, that when regional cooperation is needed the most, what we have seen over the last 2 years or so, that regional cooperation has been kind of adversely affected by countries exchanging restrictive trade measures among each other within South Asia or Bay of Bengal region itself. Now, that does not augur well for the development of value chains. So uncertainty is arising partly from the Western Hemisphere, yes, but there is also uncertainty within the region, and geopolitics is partly related to it. For example, when the Trump tariffs took place in the so-called Liberation Day tariffs of 2nd April last year, when going through media reports in the region, when I found some analysis being gleeful about the plight of other countries, for example. Oh, we have been hit by a 26% tariff, the other country is hit by a 37% tariff. And then that glee turned into despair when the tariff parity kind of remained the same, and it turned into grief when it was, for example, shot up further to 50% or so versus other countries. So we are all in the same boat together, and this uncertainty, won't benefit any one of us. And non-tariff measures, tariff measures, and para-tariff measures have hurt trade within the region in the Bay of Bengal, yes. However, new types of non-tariff measures have also arisen within the region. For example, port restrictions or quality control measures that have legitimate purpose for sure in order to protect consumer rights or food safety and so on. At the same time, these measures, when they are not disseminated properly, or when they are not implemented in a way that ensures transparency, they create uncertainty within the region. And that has also inhibited intra-regional trade. And someone earlier asked whether China is part of the global south or not. Maybe I don't know the answer to this question. However, data says for sure that it is the first or second most important trade partner, investment partner, or a source of finance for many countries in South Asia and the Bay of Bengal. That the data supports, right? And then we must be clear going forward as to whether we'll allow geopolitics, that hamper trade between China and the West to hamper our inter-regional trade or not. For example, China is an important source of investment for many countries, important source of trade for many countries. India imports a lot of inputs and intermediate goods from China. However, even between countries, there has been unease, over trade relationship with China. And in this context, going forward, having a clear idea as to how to take forward trade and investment linkages with China will be extremely important going forward. And now coming to FTAs and EPAs, partly because of the LDC graduation that Bangladesh alongside Nepal faces this year, and partly because of US tariffs. Both India and Bangladesh have gone on a spree of signing FTAs. India has signed one with UK is in the process of signing one with the EU, right? And Bangladesh, remarkably, though details are sketchy from the media, has entered into an economic partnership agreement with Japan, right? And Bangladesh and Nepal have the distinction of having the longest sensitive list under SAFTA, for example. And if BIMSTEC FTA were to come right into force right today or tomorrow, then these two countries are also likely to have a long sensitive list, right? But the fact that it has entered into an EPA with Bangladesh, Japan, and the fact, going by media reports, that it has offered tariff concessions on a range of products, perhaps does it signal a change in approach, that an appetite for tariff liberalization or trade reform is there, right? In the case of Nepal, I still see an inertia against tariff liberalization and against tariff rationalization. Now, if that's a positive development, then going forward, when entering into trade negotiations within South Asia or within the Bay of Bengal, perhaps that will also hopefully carry over to our own FTA, which is in a limbo in BIMSTEC. But importantly, there has also been a decisive thaw in relationship between India and China over the last 2 years or so. We can see that. There are also, points raised by academics, experts, even policymakers in India over the last 2 years or so as to whether India should revisit its earlier decision of opting out of RCEP. So things have changed, in a way. And when you talk about regional value chains, just focusing on India, Nepal, Bangladesh, Bay of Bengal region only, and completely not even thinking about China, when the fact that China supplies a significant amount of intermediate goods besides final goods, it's an important source of investment, would not give us the true picture. And as far as a way forward is concerned, I think one thing that must be done, although it has not been done over the last 20 years or so, is that expeditiously finalize the BIMSTEC FTA, right? FTA. That's extremely important. And at the same time, projects to strengthen the supply side capacity, will also be crucial in order to generate support for an FTA. And thirdly, there must be an earnest effort to ease the barriers posed by NTMs, right? And only then will BIMSTEC FTA will be able to add value to, for example, the SAFTA. We have SAFTA. It has reduced some tariffs, but then it has not been able to tackle NTMs. And in this context, a database on NTMs that is regularly updated, creating such a database would go a long way towards addressing non-tariff measures. And here one can draw on some efforts that have already been made under SASEC, South Asian Sub-Regional Economic Cooperation Program, as well as the more mature NTM database collection and monitoring initiative that has already taken place under ASEAN. And since Thailand and Myanmar, who are ASEAN members, are also part of BIMSTEC, perhaps we can also draw on some lessons from the ASEAN experience with regard to addressing non-tariff measures. And yes, trade facilitation measures, both infrastructure and border procedure simplification, are also relatively low-hanging fruits in that there is no revenue loss to be had here. And a concern of some governments, including Bangladesh and Nepal, which are highly dependent on import revenue, is of revenue loss. And these trade facilitation measures can address that aspect. And another form of cooperation could be sharing knowledge, research on emerging global issues, such as deforestation regulations at the European Union or the carbon border adjustment mechanism, of which academics, think tanks, researchers, policymakers in general within the region have very limited knowledge of, but over which some think tanks in South Asia, including, for example, India, or, for example, even I would point it out, RIS, who has done considerable research on WTO-specific issues, disseminating that research further, or collaborating with other researchers in the region to also incorporate their perspective, would also go a long way towards formulating a common approach to these measures that are emerging, and ultimately to suggest when negotiating with the EU or other advanced economies as to how to reduce the compliance cost associated with these measures, which will hard hit SMEs. And finally, I think the status quo ante should be restored, in the sense that, yes, we have been plagued by tariff and non-tariff barriers for a long time. But over the last 2 years or so, we have seen additional non-tariff measures in place, right? Let's try to first remove such measures and also normalize relationship at the bilateral level, so that when, for example, a Nepali enters India and shows his passport to the immigration officer does not ask that gentleman or lady from Nepal as to why, after seeing a Bangladeshi visa on his passport, what purpose led you to go to Bangladesh? For example, so that question was never asked 2 years ago, right? So that's why I say simply restoring a status quo ante. We were not living in a utopia 2 years ago, but the situation was much better back then, right? So I think a test of the pudding lies in such a question not being asked, so that there is at least a semblance of normality in bilateral ties, and then we can talk meaningfully of global value chains and regional value chains. Thank you.
Thank you, Paras. Very interesting going back to the history. Why go 2 years? We can go many, many decades ago. No boundaries, right? Anyhow, jokes apart. Amita, you have the floor.
Thank you. I think coming after 4 speakers, each accomplished and having worked alongside for a very long time now on these issues, all of us know what is it that is ailing South Asia, what is it that has been ailing the BIMSTEC region in terms of why, as the chair said, has regional cooperation not happened in South Asia. I don't think we really need to address that question, because all of us know, I think as Salim said, despite being natural trading partners, fulfilling the hypothesis of natural trading partners, common borders, culture, you said, 3 countries having been part of one country, these are all known to us, you see. But I think what is important here, trying to just add to what has already been said, much as I said has already been said, I particularly appreciate Dr. Paras bringing reality into the picture, I want to say here, you see, that I think we need to have, there are 2 ways of thinking about this issue. In terms of trade and regional value chains as far as the Bay of Bengal or what has been here, denoted as the BIMSTEC region is concerned. One is to think in a linear fashion. What has been done so far, what has been visualized all these years, how do we take that forward? I think something that Rupa had presented, sectors as far as potential is concerned, the backward linkages as far as global value chains are concerned, limited backward integration, limited global value chain integration as far as these countries are concerned. But nonetheless, you have in this, as far as BIMSTEC is concerned, an FTA that was visualized very early on in this particular formulation. And if I may say so, when it was visualized, it was like a perfect scheme of how to move forward as far as regional integration is concerned, with very clear deadlines as to when what would be achieved. It was almost modeled on what has been seen in the case of European Union, but none of that happened really, We came close to it a couple of times. I think 2009 is when we came close to signing or having some kind of a trade deal, but again, it didn't happen, So linearity in terms of what is the potential and why that has not happened, whether we have overlapping or complementing comparative advantage, I think that's not the way to think about things anymore. The world has changed, and the world is going to change hereafter. And the big change that is happening in the world is that, yes, there are global uncertainties, but also to recognize the fact that all the regions, if you look at the European Union, if you look at even North America, or what is now the Americas really, the attempt is really to move towards Americas. The idea is to have closer integration within regions. The imperative of the time is to look inwards as far as the region is concerned. Almost all regions are trying to intensify their regional integration, whether that be a CBAM as a mode as far as European Union is concerned, whether that be we will see a review as far as the USMCA is concerned, but there are already indicators that there is an attempt as far as the Americas is concerned to bring together countries that are going to be critical and crucial in sectors that are important for the future: critical minerals, green energy, AI. I think that's how different regions are thinking and looking towards their future in this phase of flux, in this phase of fluidity. Each one is trying to trace out a path for itself. So I think it's very important in the first place to be able to identify the realities of the time and the realities of the region. The realities of the time, as I said, change what the other regions are doing and how we really need to look inwards. But reality of the regions, I think, is very important to recognize also. I think in the first presentation, it was stated these are two regions. BIMSTEC can be a bridge between ASEAN and South Asia, True. I think we've been saying that right from the beginning, when BIMSTEC was visualized. But I think what is important here is to realize that these two regions are very distinct. And particularly in the context of trade and regional value chains, these are two very, very distinct regions. Not only have they evolved very differently, but they are evolving at present very differently. Of course, South Asia has never been able to exploit or to be able to fulfill or to realize its potential in terms of whatever limited complementarities we've had. I don't agree with the notion that there are no comparative advantages as far as these countries are concerned. If we work at a detailed level of the harmonized system of classification, I've done that in my book, 2013 on regional integration in South Asia, we do see certain kind of complementarities that can be taken advantage of. Textiles and clothing is one sector. I think I have always indicated and believed that this is one sector where we can go forward, but others can be found. But I think it's important also to identify that ASEAN is moving very, very differently in terms of regional value chains today. China has been mentioned. You can't deny the fact that China has, or in the last few years, since Trump 1.0, what have we seen? We've seen an intensification of the value chains as far as ASEAN countries are concerned with China. They have become, the rerouting has been happening through many of the ASEAN economies. The largest source of investment today for ASEAN economies is China. Not true as far as, of course, there are also South Asian economies that have invested their diplomatic efforts in trying to attract capital from China. But there is also here, as far as the South Asian region is concerned, India is a very distinct economy. So within ASEAN, you also have to see the extent of the impact of overcapacity, excess capacity as far as China is concerned, and how that's becoming significant for the development of domestic industries within South Asia. Thailand has been a particularly significant economy that has been impacted, I think, very significantly by excess capacity and the excess flow of commodities at cheaper prices to impact the domestic industry. To a certain extent adversely, but to a certain extent also in terms of bringing investments as far as modern day industries are concerned. How do we see Thailand, which is in this context, impacted by China, at the same time in the larger context of ASEAN, highly integrated with the Chinese economy, act as the anchor for taking the idea of regional value chains in BIMSTEC, which is a combination of South Asia and Thailand and Myanmar, forward. And I say this with a certain sense of acknowledgement that if we look at the experience of economic integration in the other regions, and historically so, what do we see? We see anchor economies having pulled up or having had the element of centricity, played the role of a central economy in a regional value chain, whether that was the US and NAFTA, USMCA, or moving forward now. Whether that was Germany and France in case of the European Union, continue to be so. So as far as BIMSTEC is concerned, when we say fastest growing economies within this region, we know that we are talking about two economies, India and Thailand, really. We know that a majority of the total trade within BIMSTEC is between India and Thailand, but that continues to be very small share of total trade for Thailand, as well as maybe larger as far as India is concerned, but this continues to be very small share as far as total trade is concerned. Can we, moving forward, look at these two economies as anchor economies to build regional value chains, to concretize the idea of economic integration within these two regions, as visualized under BIMSTEC? I think this is where we have to focus on. But here too, I would like to point out a weakness, I mean, we have a challenge. We look at the trajectory of India-Thailand and we see the early harvest scheme. That was signed in 2000, the early harvest scheme was signed in 2004, 3 or 4. We haven't seen that fructify into a full-fledged FTA till date. So how do we visualize the taking forward the idea of economic integration through enhancing trade and regional value chains, and looking at these two fastest growing, largest economies as the anchor economies forward? My only one suggestion here is identify a sector, which is what has happened in many other cases. Steel, coal and steel in case of European Union, steel as far as Mercosur is concerned. Can we look forward to something like that? Can we actually identify? I mean, that's the concrete point that I would say, whether it's think tanks or researchers put together, we need to put our minds together to do that. Identify a sector which we can, on the ground, look for acting as a bridge in terms of holding the idea of regional value chains together and becoming the basis of establishing regional value chains in the region, whether that is pharmaceuticals or whether that be in terms of textiles and apparel, but also in terms of the forward-looking sectors, green energy or critical minerals probably, So I think that is where we need to really move forward and focus on. On the NTBs particularly, I'd like to highlight that, I'd like to suggest, that we agree completely with what Dr. Paras said. We need to have a database. You're right, the chair in terms of pointing out that we've been talking about NTBs forever. NTBs have existed, they've been increased, changing political conditions, bilateral relations bring about different kinds of NTBs all the time, But having a database, I think, is what is absolutely critical. And with SCAP, I think with members of SCAP being here, both in the chair, special remarks, otherwise, can play a huge role in being able to build this. And this should be done, I think, with the member countries' industry chambers. Not probably by researchers, because we tend to kind of also go into abstracts. It's important to be directly in touch with those who face these on the ground, So I think it's very important for industry chambers to be brought in here to identify, if starting with one sector, but broadening it to more larger context, to be able to have a database of NTBs. Tariffs, of course, is a policy matter, which, yes, is taken up, not taken up, and will take its own path in terms of reduction. There is a need for reduction of tariffs, even as far as India is concerned. One has been saying that a comprehensive review of tariffs is absolutely important. We have been doing that in the last two budgets, and I hope that will be taken forward even now. But that, I think, is one part of it. The more important part of it is to be able to establish first a sector, identify the complementarities, and take that idea forward to be able to really think about exploiting whatever potential we've been talking about all these years in a really more realistic fashion. Thank you.
Thank you, Amita. Thank you very much for all those ideas. including the one which you talked about, the anchor economy, especially, yeah, in BIMSTEC. If that can happen, that would be really, really wonderful, because that has also happened in ASEAN, which has been witnessed, right? Some of the countries have taken lead and driven the agenda. Anyhow, let me now go to the last but not the least, Professor Shahid Ahmad from Jamia Millia Islamia.
Let me thank RIS and Sachin and Prabir specifically for inviting me for this opportunity. Already said, as far as this dialogue is concerned, my co-panelist and Professor Rupa Chanda on this issue. But I think we are discussing mainly that the aspect, the BIMSTEC or SAFTA or Global South, we have not delivered much. The data says like this, like whether it is a BIMSTEC story or whether it is SAFTA story, data indicate that we have not delivered. But story, it tells us that generally the countries which is in part of Global South, the cooperation is always difficult when you have a similar type of conditions. When you are competing for similar type of resources, similar type of market, so it is, I should note, there should not be any, we should not be, I think, should not think much negative aspect of that. But what is important that now, there is always a time in the history when something takeoff happens. Like in economics, we study takeoff, Rostow's theory of development stages, takeoff stages. Now, economic cooperation probably now is not the luxury, but is the need of the time in the region. And particularly, if you look from 2 points of view, the actions of the President of the United States of giving the opportunity to the member nations of the different regions that they need to cooperate to each other if you want to survive in the global economy. Not only this, repeatedly last 2003 onward, the failure of multilateralism in Doha story, it is also indication that we have to do something differently if you want to negotiate, and we have to be together in the region. So now probably these two, the failure of multilateralism and the global actions of the President of the United States with all corners of the world, I think it is not the choice to cooperate, but it is the need of the time. So what has happened, whether our intra-regional trade is 7% or 5%, or I think we should not look that aspect, but we should emphasize what we can do now. And as the first speaker, Professor Rupa, indicated that it is difficult to go for FTA or comprehensive agreement. It is better to go by step. Probably PTA type of activity will be better in BIMSTEC at early stage, though it is always desirable. But if you see that we have a number of FTAs in the region. India has a partner of many FTAs, whether India, Japan, or India, Korea, or India, Singapore, India, ASEAN, long list, and go to any country, ASEAN, there are many free trade agreements. But the actual issue is the implementation. The effectiveness of implementation and the outcome of that is not efficient. If you see all the CG, because I am also do the CG modeling, if you do the just assessment, what is expected from an FTA, and after 15 years, say India, Korea, India have free trade comprehensive agreement, India, Japan comprehensive agreement, you just assess what we are expecting in that 2010 have we delivered that? Actually, the legal framework is there. The issue is that the implementation, we need to discuss on that aspect. Okay, how to, now BIMSTEC is, we hope that it will be materialized as in the terms of free trade agreement, but probably the spirit, people to people connectivity. It is not just the infrastructure which is necessary in the aspect of BIMSTEC, but also the people-to-people connectivity, trust building in the region. That is very important. Now you see where the all the young people in the BIMSTEC region, they are looking for education where? Are the Indian students looking for education in Bangladesh and Thailand and Malaysia? No. Or the Malaysian students are looking for education in India or somewhere in, they are looking for Europe and America. So we have to develop a network. It's not that we have lacking, we have a competent institutions in the region, we have all infrastructure. We have to build trust. What the my co-panelist from Nepal is indicating, that is very true. The trust building is very important in this aspect. Now, the important aspect in all FTAs, whether it is SAFTA or now in the BIMSTEC, the mutual recognition agreement, which is lacking. Now, think there are many mutual recognition agreement. It may be related to manufacturing sector or agriculture, but see, even in the agriculture sector, even in the education sector, we don't have a degrees to be acknowledged so far in BIMSTEC countries, in SAFTA countries, in Global South. The mutual recognition agreement, which allow the labor mobility, forget the labor mobility, just recognize the degrees of equivalence. At least give the mobility to the people and create a BIMSTEC university network. Now India, which is a big economy, and nowadays implementing new education policy in all the institutions, and now implementing credit transfer to different universities. There is a model available to extend the university network from India to the BIMSTEC region, where the student, even the student, Indian student taking one course in Thailand University, and Thailand student doing one course in Jawaharlal Nehru University, and credit may be transferred. Why? And it is public good. There is no issue. But this model will help you to build the trust, will build you the long-term assets. And it is easy. India has an information library network. The 1,000 universities are connected of India with the information and library network now. Why this public good facility can be extended to the BIMSTEC and present a model, and this is a public good. This is already available system, model is available. There is a national knowledge partnership program is already in India. It can be extended to the BIMSTEC. Now, these are the things which is not big challenges to implement it. What is the outcome of this implementation of such initial mutual recognition activities will extend you, the outcome of the BIMSTEC in the long term will be beneficial. Else, you know that everybody is talking about the fragmentation happening. IMF also done a study that it will have a long-term negative implication of 7% of GDP will be decline in the long term of the global GDP. That will happen. So now for BIMSTEC, where there is earlier there is no bitterness. The idea, we talk about the SAFTA is not working because of Pakistan and the differences on different point of view. But what is the issue in the BIMSTEC? Why don't we create an environment where we can implement it effectively? And it is possible to start with the areas where there is a less controversy, like education. There is no, I think it is not even the cost is not involved in that. It is just a political will is required. Just extend the existing model is available, and institutional framework is already there. Just to have if a fifth political meeting on this front can extend it the network of universities where you can collaborate the public good and probably save the many resources where nowadays all students are moving to the north, either in the Europe or to the United States, and even the many prominent leader of the region is also talking about this. We should be, take concern on this. So my point is that I think we need to emphasize on people-to-people connectivity, and education may be the and play an important role in this. I stop it here.
Thank you, Pastor Syed. Very well said. Especially education, when you touched about the mutual recognition, the part of a services trade, and definitely much need to be done. Still have time. We started 15 minutes late, but I want to end 5 minutes early than scheduled. So if there are some questions or comments, okay, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, yes, so okay, we start from here and from the lady, yeah. Please be short, introduce yourself, be short.
I'm Vanita from National Maritime Foundation. I have two very basic questions. First, there are a lot of people who understand economics here. And what I have noticed in BIMSTEC, we have always had really good initiatives and projects, but they get stuck because of lack of funding. So can there be a proposed blended finance model which makes sure that the project don't get stuck? Because on theory, on paper, everything looks really good. And the next one is to Rajan sir. You talked about political will and you gave example of SARC. What political incentive can countries have to have that political will when it comes to BIMSTEC? Because as ma'am also talked about, countries prefer bilateral because that's easier to deal with.
Thank you. Let's take 1 or 2 more questions. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm Rajdeep Mukherjee from Bay of Bengal program, Chennai. 2 questions, sir. One thing is that the trade we do in the region, are they a trade in the excluded product that we could not sell anywhere in North, that we only sell in ourselves? So it's not a positive trade, but actually a negative trade. Second thing, when we buy from the regional countries, can I go to a shop in India and ask for a Bangladeshi product or Nepali product? Although when I go to Bangladesh, I buy a lot of product and like them. When Bangladeshis come to India, they buy a lot of product and like them. But there is no demand internally for an Indian product or Bangladeshi product in the system because our pride is associated with it. And how do we address these challenges?
Thank you. Joseph, behind. I'll come. You wanted, Joseph, you wanted? No. You raised your hand, no. Okay. Okay, first let's take the, okay, so एक वहाँ पीछे, yes.
Yeah, I agree with what Rupa has said and then Amita and others. Ever since 2015, we have been discussing, talking, exchanging views. What is possible if the BIMSTEC FTA is not achievable? So this debate has been going for since 2015, and Rajan was in the UNSCAP, and then, as you rightly said, that we analyzed the negative list, and then we found that market access is much restricted in the proposed BIMSTEC FTA. So rather than every year going back and forth, what is possible? I think 2027 we will be marking 30 years of BIMSTEC, and at least by the time, what should we do?
Behind.
Thank you very much. Dr. Ratna, long time no see since Bangkok UNSCAP. And I really like the presentations very much, and compliments to all the panelists. But as I myself come from ASEAN countries, I think ASEAN has been largely romanticized very much in this part of the world, you know. And we still have non-tariff barrier and measures, and a lot of complaints as well. And just to give you some idea, in Thailand we only have 5 beers brand name, despite having 70 million population. I think you can imagine that. It go with ministry regulations, blah, 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 and so on. With regard to Dr. Batra on early harvest, I was there with Prime Minister Yingluck, and then after that there has been at least 23rd round of negotiation, and the reason is that we do not want to listen the services sector from India, and that's why it never succeeds. So basically it's the mass plus and minus politics, you know, deficits and so on. Now, I really like your point very much. Perhaps economic integration or FTA that BIMSTEC looks forward is not a very good idea for integration, isn't it? It could be disintegration. And when you say that it should be focused on industrial sector, certain sectors and so on, we know very well that lobbyists and others will not stop because they see that this is, I'm better off with these sectors. So I also want these sectors to be in there. So that's something, I don't know whether it's possible as such or not. But I really like your idea very much when you say that past experience also tell us something about this. Now, it's intergovernmental. Supranational also has problem. UK never claimed that they have succeeded anything from there. They want to come out of it and so on. And recently in Thailand-Cambodia conflict, I think that's going to undermine ASEAN centrality now, okay? So the reality is there, collapse of Bretton Woods, keeping decline, okay, the order and so on. So what should be the tangible solutions towards BIMSTEC, which I really like very much on this. And Professor Ahmed, the largest Indian Muslims Alumni Association in Thailand is called Aligarh Muslim University Association. And last year they had problem finding hotel to celebrate their day because they have more than 1,500 people. Okay, so in a way they have also succeeded as well. But at the same time, you are also correct. As I'm the Director of Politics and Global Studies Program, we have semester system in that part of the world very much. American credit hour system. But this side of the world have another kind of system also. And how do we work out to make sure that it becomes compatible for both sides? Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, okay, here.
Thank you, Chair. I am Subodh from Indian Council of World Affairs. My question is to Dr. Kharel. Since Nepal, since we talked about the uncertainty at global level and regional level, what about the uncertainty at domestic level? In the case of Nepal, Nepal has been grappling with several incomplete transitions. I think 6 phases of incomplete transitions has taken place, and each time we have seen a lot of destruction which has hampered the economy and policy and of course the investment and trade sector. So if there is kind of uncertainty at the domestic level, how would anyone can ensure investment, and which is seen as complementary to trade, and how that particular countries and those countries and can become the part of regional value chain? Thank you.
Thank you. The last question at the back end. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm Devesh from IFPRI, and I'm also a faculty at Ashoka. So, Ashoka University. So, I mean, there are a lot of questions that, really relate to me. And we worked a big project on BIMSTEC, which was which we're involved with RIS. And we work a lot, and I also teach on global value chain. So there's a lot of things that I have to So one of the question that I've always realized that it's we're talking about non-tariff barriers and tariff barriers and trying to get into an FTA. I think uh, the biggest problem that I see in this is about the trade policy uncertainty. Today your tariff is like 5%, tomorrow your tariff is 55%. We have a lot of things that happen in pulses and edible oil, and we work a lot with Myanmar. They produce pigeon pea only for India. They don't even consume, right? And then that part, and then you interact with the farmers and they say, why would we produce? Because now we are not trying to produce and sell to India because our tariffs have gone up from 5% to 50%, and there also been like quotas that get imposed even if they are not WTO compatible. So I just want to know that this is about the trade policy certainty. We really, you have bound tariffs which are above 100% for sure, but it gives you a lot of leverage to work on. And so I really concur with the fact that, with FTAs, we are really barking down the wrong tree, that, tariff is not the issue. It's the uncertainty, the non-tariff barriers, and that's the thing that we really need to look at. And that's the point, I think. And the one last point I wanted to make about, at a private university, we do have a system of credit transfers. We are with European universities, with the American universities. My Ashoka students, they do some semester there, they get credit, their students come and say, so why is it related to the public education system that we cannot do something like that? And because that would be a big way of integration.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, now we'll start. Rupa, you want to answer any of the questions? Would you? एक mic यहाँ दे दीजिए. Quick 1 minute, and then I'll come to you, Professor Shahid, Amita, and then Paras. Salim is also there, yes.
I think there was nothing specifically addressed to me, but the one point that I'd like to highlight is the need to move towards, I completely agree with Amita, that you have to look at focused areas. I wouldn't only look at sectors, I would actually look at issues also. That's why I mentioned about digital, because it may not be something related directly to trade and investment or value chain integration, but it will give you the basis for developing some of these things, the trust, the people mobility. There will be an imperative, and we should probably choose those areas where industry could be a potential driver in terms of its interest, and there's already established initiatives and success stories. Because I think digital will also give you, the financial integration and some of these things which have to go alongside with future integration. That is one area. Sustainability and all are larger issues, so that is, I think, a bit more complicated in terms of how you would deepen cooperation. And looking at very forward-looking areas, things like critical minerals and all of that might be difficult at this stage within BIMSTEC itself. I also think there is a big opportunity here in terms of, and I'll repeat what I said, the external relations that you have with other parties which are investors can be utilized for fostering the intra-regional. How you do it in a focused way, issue-based way, whatever, is something we have to pragmatically think about.
Thank you, Rupa. Dr. Salim Rehan, you have any comment, quick comment?
Yes, very quick comment. One is that there is a portion about funding different projects. I think one important aspect is that if BIMSTEC doesn't appear as a kind of credible project itself, then funding different components of it becomes difficult. So many funders, they would not really find it worthwhile, worthy to spend money on different projects. So that is one thing. We need to make BIMSTEC project, the overall project, something meaningful. And how do you really make it meaningful? My idea is that the conventional way of integration in South Asia and BIMSTEC region is actually failed. We need to think out of the box. We need to find other areas of cooperation. That's why I really appreciate what Rupa was saying. Some other areas. Probably the conventional way of thinking was that we start with the FTA because that really builds the confidence, and then you move to other areas of cooperation. But in South Asia and in the BIMSTEC region, that didn't really work. We need to, as I said, that's why we need to find other areas of cooperation. Probably one area is that some of the regional value chain really worked in this part of the world. Garments and ready-made garments and textiles that really work. And for that, you don't really have to have come up with any specific policy agenda. It worked kind of a way the private sector they wanted. So I think if you can identify some other sectors apart from ready-made garments, even in the services area, services sector, I think that could be very, very helpful. My final point is that, my very final point, we talked quite a lot about the bilateral relations among countries. And I appreciate one commentator made a point that the domestic politics also contribute quite a lot, when it comes to the failure of this whole integration process in South Asia and the BIMSTEC region. We need to look at into that area as well. We need to make regional cooperation an agenda in the domestic politics as well, to have a kind of positive attitude towards it. Otherwise, I think the whole ecosystem would not really be very favorable for a deeper integration. Thank you.
Salim, thank you very much. Professor Said.
I think it's, you see, it is it depends on if you want to implement credit transfer system. It is feasible because in my university we are running a course with the universities in France, where 1 year they are doing, 1 year the students are doing in India, and they are doing the degree. When it is possible with the France, it is also possible with the French government. Now the government of India have launched a global university initiative for the university integration program. And also in India there is an institution, this all AUI, which actually if we were already infrastructure exists. Now earlier within India it was not possible to transfer the credits earlier, but now last 4 or 5 years the system has been introduced where within the India credit transfer is possible. Students are doing the papers in different universities, and then a particular ID is issued for Indian students. Those who are students in India, they can do their different credits in different universities, and then where the last semester is completed, university degree is issued by that particular university. But extended that program to a BIMSTEC countries, my point of it is feasible, and it is just only required obviously some consultation, negotiation, AUI accreditation, and different equivalence, identifying different universities where this is possible. And now Government of India has launched a SWAM program where the credit can be online, where you can, any student of particular restricted to Indian students so far, any student for any year, it is only credit is identified. It is 4 credit, 3 credit, 2 credit, 1 credit papers. A student can do, it is online programs, and that is part of the university degree if they pass that particular credits from online course. Now this is a run by NIC, National Informatics Center of, this is Government of India under ministry. Now this is, when it is possible, now this infrastructure is built, it can be extended to the BIMSTEC countries and BIMSTEC university network, which can help people to people connect, faculty exchange program and student exchange program in that. So in my point of view, it is feasible. We are already having this type of exchange with European universities. Now why it is not possible with BIMSTEC, the credit transfer, this system? Only we issue a certificate, now it will be online, and where we have a memorandum of understanding with the university, they are accepting that credit. So credit transfer, in both in a physical teaching mode, it is feasible, possible. And now the Government of India SWAM portal, if you go, there are thousands of courses is available, which is a particular 4 credit paper, 3 credit paper, and this just recognition is required in different institutional framework. If different institution in different countries recognize that framework, then credit transfer will be possible in my point of view.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Amita, you have
yeah, very briefly. what I've already said. I'll just add one point to that. But identify the sector, identify the issues within that sector, get the industry involved. Lastly, and what I want to add here is educate the industry. Because I think the industry is always apprehensive of opening up and integrating, despite the fact that they have significant advantages from the process. So I think educating the industry is very important in this entire, coming together of the two regions, and that's what maybe we should also be focusing on.
Thank you, Amita. Paras.
So I agree for Nepal. Domestic policy uncertainty is the biggest challenge. That's the biggest challenge. Only after that is the challenge of uncertainty within the region. And only after that is the uncertainty arising from US trade policy. And the Gen Z protests that we witnessed in September last year, and the subsequent political uncertainty that looms or hangs over Nepal, is actually, it masks corruption, misgovernance, misrule that was festering just beneath the surface for years. Right? And part of that could be reflected in lack of policy consistency, one policy granting certain concessions and the other policy removing those concessions. So I agree. I mean, I have no issue with that comment.
Sure. Yeah, we are running short of time. Pravir, can I take 1 minute?
No,
yeah.
I'll be brief.
Sure. Mike.
I've been hearing. You see, I've been hearing for many decades trust deficit. Dr. Chanda had presented a paper where she compared with ASEAN countries. I have lived in ASEAN for many years. If you are thinking about trust deficit, is no less than in South Asia. Singaporeans can't stand Malaysians, Malaysians cannot stand Singaporeans. Thais and Cambodians, they fought wars many times. But when it comes to business, trade, all those trust deficit disappears overnight. And, here comes a very fundamental question. Many years back, an anthropologist and a sociologist called Worthen, Dutch sociologist, he made a theory that, Asian bourgeoisie is always different from the European and other kinds of bourgeoisie. Asian bourgeoisie had always been educated elites. They didn't come from the entrepreneur class. Nationalist movement and all that were basically from the educated and literate class. I think the trust deficit appears more among this so-called educated elite, trying to sort of, examine a lot of things. So I think that it's a question of elite also, that why is it, Mahathir, Malaysian old man, he even 2-3 months back, he made a comment, South China Sea conflict will linger. Don't pay much attention to it. Put attention on trade and economic development so that you can really improve the quality of life. And with the improvement of quality of life, the trust deficit will also disappear. So I think it's a question of elite and the kind of people who make decision making in South Asian countries. All bureaucrats and the so-called educated elite who cook up a lot of this trust issues and other things.
Thank you very much. I don't want to hold, we are already late, and Just summary, yes, many argue that FTA, which is a deep integration, is required for BIMSTEC, but yes, addressing the non-tariff barrier at the border infrastructure, removing bottlenecks. Some countries need to take the lead, what Amita said, pulling up effect. Of course, trust, we have heard. I entirely agree. It's not only for Southeast Asia. European integration, when it happened, there were a lot of conflicts that we are facing here, border disputes, fights, and everything there. But yeah, you require that kind of leadership for some countries which can then forget other things and pull it to the girl there. When you ask, yes, finances can be available, the government funds for some research and other things. But definitely when you are implementing at these, there are various layers at which it is being worked. And we have been working for the last 3-4 years, not for the whole of a BIMSTEC, but part of BIMSTEC. And we found when you look at the word prosperous, whose prosperity you are talking about? Country? Region? Only businessmen? Or those poor people or the communities living at the border who have for last 30-40 years are continue to be poor? Who you are talking about the prosperity? And therefore all these layers are important. I will give you one short example. The land custom post at Bangladesh and India, they agreed one day in a week they will close. The remaining 6 days the trade will happen. The question comes, which day you close? Friday is closed for Bangladesh, Sunday is closed for India. Effectively, it comes 2 days closer. So there are layers, and everybody has a role to play. And things are improving. We have been working, we are seeing many of these, things at the ground level are changing. It takes time. Things take time. We need to be patient. We need to keep moving. We need to keep dialogue. We need to keep talking like this, and I am indeed thankful to RIS and the Government of India and other agencies who have supported this, because the people who come from different countries bring that kind, and that is what, you build trust. Thank you very much. Please give a big hand to all the speakers.
Thank you very much. Very, very excellent session. That's the word I can just recollect this short time. And we are running late, but even then, I have 2 talks to complete. May I request Dr. Chanda, who couldn't walk well, to come. She has just undergone an operation so that we can take a good photo. So may I request the photographer's friend to take a photo, and there is something, yeah, please.